Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the Character Agency in YA panel. I'm Elizabeth Whitton, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. A few things. This session will last 50 minutes, the first 30 of which will be allocated to discussing the topic, and then followed by the last 20 minutes for Q&A if we need it. I might be answering questions during the session as well. It just depends if they relate to what we're talking about. There's a Q&A toggle at the bottom of your screen, so that's where you go and just enter your question and then we'll see it. Due to time constraints, the session is only going to be 50 minutes long. That's it. If we're still talking, if we're not talking, whatever, it ends then. And our wonderful Zoom host, Heather Wilkie, will let us know. And we'd like to thank her actually for putting in the time and helping us make this panel a success. Finally, I think it's now time to introduce our panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'll start first. Hey, you know what? I'm going to tell an interesting fact. Brenda has an interesting fact. You have a book that's in the Louvre. Is that correct? Tell us about that.
That is correct. Yep, at the archives at the Louvre Museum in Paris.
Yeah, Brenda wrote a wonderful book a couple of years ago about a girl in the Epoch era, and the Louvre in France liked it so much they put it in their bookstore. And that's one interesting fact. And then another interesting fact, someone on this panel likes to hang out with sharks. And we're not talking about the guys in the bars. Who would that be, Elissa? You've traveled a lot, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, I used to travel a lot before I became a writer.
Yeah, being a writer wrecks everything, doesn't
it? It really ruined my disposable income.
Hey, yeah. And then I happen to know you're in role play, Nicole, is that true?
I've done some D&D. I'm not actually in a game right now, but...
Oh, is that right? So you do the D&D, eh?
Oh, yeah.
So what's your favorite persona?
I thought I would like wizards because I write fantasy, but it turns out that I like playing fighters better.
You like the kick-ass
bash things.
Great, that's good. Awesome, well thank you guys for showing up. A wonderful panel here, and I think now I'll just let everybody introduce themselves, what projects they're working on, and just a little bit about themselves so you can get to know them. I'll start first, and then we'll move on to Brenda. I'm Elizabeth Whitton, as I said before, and I write speculative YA fiction and adult fiction. My YA novel, Houses of the Old Blood, won the 2018 Aurora Award for Best YA Novel. Second book in that series is going to be launched in the fall, and it's called The Gold Flame of Seneca. My short story, The Grass Gods, is going to appear in the Prairie Gothic. Thanks. Thank you. It's going to appear in the Prairie Gothic anthology, which will also be released in October. Now you can buy my book on Amazon, and you can also find it on the shared author table on the When Words Collide website. And now I'll pass it on to Brenda.
Well, thank you, Liz. My name's Brenda Johnson. My pen name is Brenda Joyce Leahy. My first YA novel is you're not going to be able to see it, The Art of Rebellion. And that was published in 2016. As Liz mentioned earlier, there's a copy lodged in the archive library at the Louvre Museum, where I did much of the research for it. I've just had a nonfiction story published in these backgrounds. YYC Pop, I'm not sure if you can see the cover, that was published this summer. And current projects, I'm working on a picture book that has to do with the Calgary Stampede. And right now I've got out with publishers my YA contemporary set in Canmore. Deals with biathlon, so stay tuned on that.
Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Luiken, and I'm the author of 14 different teen novels. They're all either science fiction or fantasy. My most well-known is probably Violet Eyes, and its sequel, Silver Eyes, and more Canadian one is Frost. My most recent one is Feral, and I call this my teen werewolf novel. I love that cover. I wrote my first novel when I was just 13 years old and was published while still in high school. And I can't go more than 3 days in a row without writing.
Awesome. Okay, Elissa.
My name is Elissa,
Oh,
and
God. I just called you the name of my heroine. Oh, well, okay. That's how I think of you. Elissa, I'm so sorry.
no worries. And I write young adult. I've written a historical fiction about Amazon warriors, and I loved the research, but oh gosh, research can take a long time. So the next book I'm working on is a contemporary YA about a whitewater kayaker, which is my sport. So it's been a little easier to write about something new rather than having to research every detail.
That will be a great book because I've seen video of her whitewater kayaking. She's an animal on the. My heart is like this. Okay, let's move on to some questions. I'm going to start with Nicole. And the question is, can you tell us what character agency is and why it's important in YA? And then we'll let others chip in if they chime in afterwards.
Okay. I didn't know I was supposed to define it, so I don't have a definition.
Oh, then don't
ready.
define it. Just do the question I assigned you.
Okay,
We'll all define it. Okay.
Why is character agency important? Well, I
Yeah.
could think of a couple of reasons right off the bat. First of all, agency increases your character sympathy. While we're more inclined to be sympathetic towards a character that shares our fears and the same sort of troubles, we also really like to see and we admire characters who do or say things that we're not brave enough to say ourselves. The second thing is that agency also helps us avoid railroading our characters. As authors, we often know that the plot is supposed to happen like this, A, B, C. And so if your character doesn't have agency, then it can feel like you're railroading them along, like you put them in a situation that no sane character would go along with. So if you have a character that has strong agency, then often they'll kind of tell you, they'll stop working, they'll go on strike, and insist that you rework that plot so that they do have more agency, or they have a logical reason to do that part of the plot. I wanted to note that having agency isn't just doing things. Sometimes a character will try and fail, but as long as they try, that's still agency. And sometimes they will make an error, they'll make a mistake, but as long as it's a choice, then that still contributes to their agency. I wanted to talk about an example of great agency in the Hunger Games. Now, in dystopias, it's really easy to railroad characters because you have this horrible situation where there isn't a lot of choice. The choices are often like, go along with it or die. And if you think about it, if you think about the opening chapter, it was kind of all set up for us to think that Katniss's name was going to be drawn out in the reaping. And if that had happened, it might still have been an okay story. But the author did such a wonderful thing by giving Katniss agency, by instead having her sister's name come up in the reaping. And then Katniss makes that choice that's like spawned a meme, I volunteer as tribute. And in that moment, she went from being a victim and someone that we pity to being a hero. And that's what you want for your main character.
Oh, that's awesome, Nicole. Did you want to add anything to that, Elissa?
So I think that
Brenda?
one of the questions that often comes up in young adult is, well, why aren't their parents there? Why aren't their parents getting involved? So I think that one of the things that we have to worry about when we're creating our plots is, okay, well, how can we create a situation where this character is making these choices and it's realistic? So that's kind of one of the additional challenges of YA is, like, how do we put these characters in a situation where they have the ability to make choices and people aren't getting thrown out of the story?
Yeah, exactly. How about you, Brenda? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, when you asked the question, why is it important?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to our audience, the YA audience, because they have been growing and progressing, hopefully in their relationship with their family, but they haven't had much opportunity, especially at the lower years, to actually exert agency. So I think it's important in terms of serving our readers to give them role models and examples in someone else's life where they do take control. And so that was just what I wanted to add.
Someone just asked a question in our Q&A, and they actually do want to know, define agency. So I would define it as the character having the ability to affect or doing things, that affect their environment, that change the course, an action that changes the course of a direction where they're going. Agency is a forward motion, I would think, and it's the ability, or it's the thing that the character does that basically gives them power of some kind within their own narrative, to direct, and so that is, I don't know, what do you guys think? Is that a good one?
Yeah, or I think I've heard it described as a character's ability to drive the plot.
Okay, that sounds very concise and better. Yes, that's right. Boy, I hope, and that's why you're a panelist. Yes. So anyway, I hope that kind of answered that question. Thank you very much for that question. All right. Another question is, and I think we were, talking about this earlier about not killing the parents. I think let's dive further into how do you give your character more agency? Let's just. Elissa gave us some great examples. How about you, Brenda?
Okay, well, is this part of the same question about the challenges that characters face, or are you asking something slightly different to that?
Yeah. Okay. I think it could be kind of combined with that, or, Elissa, if you want to take the lead on the agency without killing your parents, you can go there too.
Well, I think that often when we get into plot situations where we're like, well, how is this character going to do this without parents getting involved? Because, parents love their children. Parents want to get involved and they want to try to solve their kids' problems. So that's kind of a natural reaction for parents. So when you're trying to create your story, it's like, okay, well, what's wrong with their parents that they're not trying to fix this? So often our first reaction is, well, let's kill the parents. And in my first novel, that's what I did. I was like, oh, well, I'll just kill her. I killed her mom and I made her dad blind. And I was like, okay, well, that makes that easy.
Okay, they're out of the way.
But I think
I don't have to worry about them.
That's often the easiest thing to do. But if you kind of drive down into it, you can figure out other ways to give your character more agency without necessarily just making them an orphan.
To me, the danger of killing your parents to give your character agency is this. Your parents have pivotal roles in your life, and you have to, if you lose a parent, you have to deal with that. It's time consuming, and it also changes the character, your main character, in fundamental ways. So if you're going to be killing off parents, you're going to be probably dealing with that death throughout the story. So I think it gives a much more fresher feel and a more interesting feel, and allows you to expand your character more if you can find different ways to give them agency.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a book I read called Dairy Queen, and in it, the main character has a brother who's seriously injured in a hospital, and her dad is afraid of hospitals, and her mom has an injury. So she's the one who has to deal with all the hospitalization and the doctors, and she has to kind of step up and grow up and deal with this situation. And I thought that was a really brilliant way of dealing with it. Yeah. Giving the parent a phobia or an injury or some other responsibility that they have to deal with, so they're not able maybe to deal with that specific situation when they normally would. And then your character has to kind of rise to it.
That's right. Yeah, I think, there's always, we want to get the parents out of the lives of our main characters. And that's because we want to focus on the relationships the young adult has with everybody else, so, her contemporaries and her peer group. But it's like you said, it's more authentic if there's a real life situation where the parents are still there, maybe not so much involved in the life or distracted, but it really makes it, authentic, I think, more so than killing them off.
For sure.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to ask Brenda a question I actually
Oh,
assigned
sorry.
you.
Actually, I had more to say on that one.
I am so sorry, Nicole. Go for it.
Okay, I just wanted to give a couple more classic examples of ways to give your character agency without killing off the parents. They can simply be in a situation where their parents aren't there. You know, if they're going at vacation with a friend or off to an aunt's house, if they're at summer camp, or if they're just at school for most of the plot, especially boarding schools. I think that's why one of the reasons why boarding school stories were so popular back in the day. And uh, Going back to sort of what Elissa was saying about having the parents have a problem, you can also make the parents more powerless. I'm used to writing science fiction and fantasy, so the dystopic examples where the parents really can't do anything, or I had one once. One of my novels, Dreamfire. The the character had a premonition power where their dreams were prophetic, but their mom had a reason why she didn't want to believe this, and so she wouldn't believe the warnings, and therefore that left my character in a place where she had to act. So those kind of things. And I also just wanted to note that there are other reasons than a character agency for why sometimes there's such a high death rate among YA parents. I think often it's used to give your character a tragic backstory and thus a lot of character sympathy. And also, sometimes it's just conservation of characters. If you have two characters who play basically the same role, like a mom and a dad often do, then sometimes it's just easier to scrunch them down into just one role.
That's really, yeah,
That's a good point.
exactly. Good point. Really good point. Um, so what are the unique challenges that face YA characters when they try to acquire agency? And maybe Brenda could lead us with that.
Sure. And I'll just tag on to the earlier question. One of my favorite examples of turning the whole parents trope on its head, it's called When We Were Four. I think it came out 3 or 4 years ago. And Then We Were Four by Nancy Werlin. And it's 5 teens, and they get together at the beginning of the book, and then almost immediately one of them dies. And the remaining 4 come up with the theory that it's the parents that are trying to kill them off. And so the entire rest of the book, the parents are the antagonists. And the teens have to work around the parents that they believe are actually trying to kill them. And it's just a brilliant twist on that. Really, really recommend it if you're looking at parent and YA protagonist.
There's an episode of Buffy where the parents try to kill them, which I love that episode.
So back to Liz's question. So some of the challenges that teens face specifically, the categories I put the age one in is lack of respect. So because a teen is less than 18 years of age, they are given a lack of respect for the ability to make decisions. And that can either be by adults that don't know the teen at all, but they're making assumptions based on that age. And it can also be by adults who do know the teen, and that previously the teen has made some bad decisions, which is realistic. And the frustration that the teen will face trying to prove themselves that no, now they've learned more and they can make a good decision. So I think those are really good challenges that are fodder for upping the conflict. And so there's ways of getting around that. There's obviously lying or deception, sneaking out of the house, skipping school, running away from home. But an example of someone overcoming that lack of respect for her age is My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. And although it's really not marketed as a YA book, the protagonist is YA. And so she hired a lawyer and took her parents to court because she wanted to exert her decision over her own physical body. So I thought that was kind of a cool example of finding a way around parental overbearing. The next one is bubble wrapping, and we know that parents are, as Elissa had said, they want the best for their kids in most cases, and they're trying to protect them, but they're not allowing them to fail, and that can be at an extreme. And so that's a very difficult thing to overcome when the parents aren't being evil or even having bad intent, but they're preventing the teen from exerting agency and making decisions. So again, to overcome, you either have to deceive the parents or you have to have a situation where you're convincing the parent that you have the ability to make decisions. And a kind of a neat twist, again, I was looking for YA books that kind of go that extra mile and twist these situations, is Susan Nielsen's Optimists Die First, because a sibling died and then the parents were extremely overbearing of the teen. But what actually happened is it's the teen who has the problem. And she is afraid to do anything outside of the little box of appropriate activities. So she's the one who has to overcome her own fears. So I thought that was kind of a cool take. Family expectations they're cultural, or they could be religious, or they could be several other things, but especially cultural or religious, there's expectations placed on teens to act a certain way, and when that isn't their choice, they have to exert agency. One that I really like as well to use is a lack of financial resources, because most teens, especially on the lower end of the age category, they really don't have control of their own money. They may get money for birthdays, or they may get a part-time job and be able to save up. But if you can put them in a situation where they need financial resources, they have to be resourceful to find that money, and that opens just all sorts of plot twists. An example, of course, is part-time job, lying about what the money's for, stealing it, borrowing it from somebody who's not trustworthy.
That's a really cool point, isn't it, Brenda? You know, we always think of agency as a powerful or as a positive action. Doing something negative can be a way to acquire agency as well. And that's kind of an interesting point I didn't even really think of.
And it just kind of sends you down a path where there's bound to be conflict, because there's going to be consequences. And just two others really quickly is naivete, because YA protagonists often don't have the life experience to be able to know who to trust and who not to trust. So again, there's a lot of potential for conflict, for your character to trust the wrong people. And that's, I think, a very realistic situation. It's harder to swallow when you've got adults who've been out in the working world, but when you've got a teen, because of their age alone, it's more realistic to have them trusting the wrong people. And then finally, I've got under a category of impulsivity, because there are lots of teens who haven't developed the action and consequences skill. So they'll go out and make decisions or act impulsively. And again, I think that's very realistic. And so you can create lots of situations there. And I just had the example of Alexandria of Africa by one of my favorite Canadian authors, Eric Walters, where the teen has overindulgent parents and she acts she acts out because she's so spoiled, and all of her agency actually gets taken away from her by the court, and she gets put in a community service situation. And then
So in that situation,
regain.
how does she display her agency? So she's in a situation where she has no agency, all her things have been taken away. What does she do in that particular thing that gave her agency to make the story interesting?
So she the only way to get out of youth detention center is to go on this mission with a charitable organization. Okay. And so, yeah, she's under the control of these people who are running the charity. And she ends up going to Africa and volunteering. And how she exerts her agency initially is by the same behaviors that got her into trouble. And then gradually she learns to be part of a team, and she actually makes decisions and leads the team out of trouble. So you see the character arc, but it kind of set her up.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating.
So
thank you for those wonderful
are just some of my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for those wonderful examples, Brenda. That was great.
Yeah,
Does anybody have anything they'd like to add?
I don't have much to add, but just in addition to financial things, there's also the problem often of transportation. You know, if there's danger threatening, a lot of us can hop in the car and drive away, and that's not an option for most teens.
So that gives them an opportunity to creatively get themselves out of it and exert agency that way.
Yes, exactly. It's like, do they run? Do they hop a bus?
Yeah, get on their bike. How about you, Elissa? Anything? Or?
I think we're going to talk later about what to do when your characters are in situations where they don't have agency. Is that?
Yeah, let's ask that question. I think that's a good one. Let's go. It's a more general question here. What happens when the main character doesn't have agency? What happens to the story? What happens to that character when they don't have agency and don't exert it?
I think it depends on the character. I think an active character can still feel like they're doing stuff even in the situation with no agency. So if we go back to the Hunger Games, Katniss basically doesn't have a lot of agency once she leaves her town. She's completely controlled. She has no control over her diet schedule, her training schedule. Like, I think she can go up to the roof, and that's the only choice she can make. But she's in this internal battle where she's trying to figure out her strategy. She's trying to figure out who she can trust. She's trying to figure out if she wants to play the game or not. So because she's having all these internal discussions and she's like actively making choices about her strategy, she feels like a really active character, which makes her feel like she has agency.
She's asserting it through her intellect.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas if you had that same plot and you had a more passive character in that plot, it wouldn't work because it would just be so boring. So if you think about your character, if you have a more passive character, then you have to put them in a situation where they have more agency.
Awesome. Nicole, anything to add to that?
Yeah, if your character doesn't have agency, then you risk them being very passive, and your reader may lose patience with them and just say, "Come on, do something." Basically, if your character doesn't have agency, if they're not in control of the plot, that means the antagonist is in control of the plot. Or again, it's the railroading thing where it feels like the author is just sending it where they want and where nobody would really actually go.
If that happened, I think the reader would probably feel a bit manipulated, which would take them out of the narrative, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How about you, Brenda?
Oh, I agree with what's been said on that, and just highlights, I think, the importance of creating opportunities for your character to exert agency, even if it is more an intellectual plan or thinking ahead. But you can usually create a situation where there's some decision making to be made.
Yeah.
So your character can at least be not completely passive.
That's great. To give a character agency, have them make decisions. Like, even if they're in a very controlled situation, find something that they could make a decision about and keep giving them decisions as a way for them to exert it. I think that's kind of a cool concept. Thank you, Brenda. Another question. Should everybody in the story have agency? Like, do you think, or?
Mostly. I
Like,
think,
is it too much? Is it too much if everybody's driving things?
well, to a certain extent, most people in real life do things. They make choices all the time. I mean, even a baby exerts agency. Like, if you've ever tried to dress a baby when it did not want to be dressed, yeah, But in the end, the parent's going to prevail. So it's the the characters, I think, mostly should have agency, but if their role in the book is small, then their agency should be small. They should be just making small decisions, if that makes sense.
If a character in your book didn't have a lot of agency, so you have your main character has agency, but let's say like a minor character doesn't have agency, does that almost turn them into like a stereotype, like a two-dimensional character?
I think it depends how they're acting. Like, I think, like, if we go back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, everyone hated Dawn, the younger sister. And I think part of that is she doesn't really have any agency, so she comes across as really whiny.
Yeah. So without agency, your character, and I think Nicole said this, but we'll reiterate, becomes unsympathetic. Which is what you don't want. I mean, the character doesn't always have to be likable, but you have to somehow be sympathetic to them. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's a role for somebody who might be passive, and it might even be as a foil or a contrast to your own character, to your main character. So I haven't got an example in mind, but I think I can think of some YA characters who might have, say, a best friend who is appalled every time the main character makes decisions. So you're getting a call and response kind of thing. So it could be a character, lesser character who is passive, and it highlights the difference and just
Dramatic foil.
Yeah.
Because I wonder if you have all your characters actively making decisions, I mean, which is true life, like that's real life, but it's almost too much. Is it too much noise in your novel? Is it too much color? Is it, because I guess the whole thing about writing is how we focus attention and what we include and what we don't include. And I wonder if there's a danger in that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right that you don't want to have your story going off in 4 different directions at once. It needs to have focus, and so some characters you may have to rein in.
Oh, one of our attendees, Sharon, she goes, Neville Longbottom in Harry Potter. He goes through the first book being acted upon, and then he stands up for what he thinks is right at the end. So there's a character, great example, Sharon. There's a character, right there, who is an example of what happens if the character doesn't have agency, and what happens when the character does. And don't we all love Neville, in the last Harry Potter movie, or in the last Harry Potter book, when he takes charge and makes things happen. And that's a really good example, I think, of the contrasts.
So he does have a moment of agency in book 1, where he stands up and tries to stop them from sneaking out because he doesn't want Gryffindor to lose any more points. And I think Hermione stuns him or something.
Hermione stuns
So
him.
he lost it quite quickly, did he?
Yeah, and he gets 10 points.
10 points at the end.
Yeah.
Then the cup.
Alyssa, people are really digging your Buffy references.
I can talk about Buffy all day. I'm going to make a Buffy panel next year. We'll just talk about how wonderful Buffy is.
That would be a panel I would watch. So what are your favorite characters like that really display agency in ways that you like? Can you name them? Like, since we're on that sort of track.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
One vampire horse girl. Everybody's going, yes, Buffy. I think that would be a very good panel, Elissa.
Well, if we think of Harry Potter, Harry Potter is always kind of displaying agency throughout the books as he's trying to solve the mystery. Like, he's not supposed to get involved in these things, but he's intrigued by the mystery. He wants to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So he's always pursuing this question and breaking all the rules, which makes it so much fun.
Yeah. Oh, I had a good comment here from Sandy Fitzpatrick. The side character could make decisions that derail the main character's plans. So yeah, that's a good point she's made. Going back to that question, you have everybody making decisions and everybody with agency. You're kind of making a very complicated story where there could be a lot of outcomes that are unintended, right? So while we want our main characters to have agency, we also have to be very careful upon who we bestow it as well, other characters.
Yes, in some ways, but you do also need your antagonist to have agency.
Yeah, that's true.
There should be almost a push-pull with what your character does causes problems for your antagonist, and then they act, which causes problems for your protagonist.
Yeah, well, your antagonist has to have more power generally to make the story work.
Yeah. Do you think there is a real relationship between agency and power? Are they synonymous, or is it a little bit?
They're aspects of something. Like,
yeah.
If you're powerless, then you are lacking agency.
Yeah.
But just because you have agency doesn't mean you have any power. I think agency is more internal. It's
okay.
more about your ability.
As opposed to external. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Whereas power could be your ability to influence others. But if you're powerless, then often you don't have agency. Yeah. So I think they're aspects of similar concepts.
It's kind of subtle.
Yeah.
External, internal. Yeah, because it's always about choice, right? Decisions.
I think it goes back again to the fact that your character has to try even if they're going to fail. Mm-hmm. So maybe it turns out that they are powerless, but they still tried.
Yeah. I have a question. I always, and it's not, I'm not going, feminism, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk about the fact that sometimes main characters who are girls they have their agency taken away, and then the supporting characters are the ones who come in and rescue them and take care of them, and so do you think that's a common thing, with female protagonists? Is that something that we really, really have to watch for?
I don't think it's as common anymore. Yeah. But I think that when it does happen, people it upsets people.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think it's easy to fall into that sometimes. And I hit that with my historical novel because you want to be true to the period. So it's set in 1900. Women had very little agency in the respect that they had very little control over their lives. And so I really struggled with that, so I had to create a character who was fighting against all those societal norms. And I don't think it's that different now in a way. I think it's easy to fall into that trap.
Mm-hmm. One of our attendees has asked a really good question. And we have a very interesting audience. And this is from Isla. And it is, how do you know if you've given your character too much agency? So too much power over their things. So that to me may be a person in a magic system where they have so much power, nothing is, hard or...
You lose conflict.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, it stops the conflict of the plot.
You lose believability. Like if people are like, well, that would never happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So...
Yeah, so if they try and always succeed, she should try and fail. Or in the fantasy setting, there's often a price set for magic.
Using magic, or it's somehow contained. I'm going to take that try and fail comment you just made, Nicole, and lead it into the next question, which is, let me see. What if your character, and this is from Leslie Wilbury. Oh, hi, Leslie. What if your character tries and fails so many times that they give up for a while at least?
That could be the
so I guess that following, have they lost their agency, or have they become a sort of a disposable character? I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's a moment of passivity when you're just frustrated. And I think we've all had that, and that's really realistic. Anything that we've tried and failed, it's hard to get back up and go again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Nicole, that's the dark night of the soul, and I think most stories have an aspect of that.
Yeah.
Brenda, you too? You have something? Yeah.
Well, I was just agreeing. I was thinking the dark night of the soul as well. That's just kind of when the character has to dig really deep to drag themselves back up and act again. But
Which-
you want that. You want that. It's real life. It's realistic.
So maybe character agency is just like a plot or like pacing. Yeah, pacing.
But the Dark Night of the
Maybe
Soul is
sometimes you have a lot of character agency, sometimes you don't. And then sort of having it ebb and flow might make a character very interesting as well. Anybody have thoughts on that?
sorry, not so much with what you were saying, but with
Okay.
what we were talking about before. Like the Dark Night of the Soul is a thing, but it's sort of a once a book thing. If your character does fail continually through the novel, I think you can risk losing reader sympathy, and it just becomes too depressing. They may not want to keep reading.
Yeah. I just have, this is an aside from the agency thing that we're discussing, but for me, there always has to be an element of hope in a YA story. That's just my own personal belief. And if we lose that hope, then we can't, it's almost too hard to enjoy the story. That's just my own. Maybe you can do it in other genres, but for me, hope is important. Some kind of hope in YA. Okay, so we're getting down to our last 8 minutes. If there are more questions out there, now would be the time to put them in. And I'm just going to take a look at our chat. Okay, let's see. Marie Powell, excuse me, Marie, sorry about that. Actually, having a lot of agency can create an interesting situation in terms of magical power. And then she cites the example of Jim Butcher in the Dresden Files, where he goes over the top and has to be reined in by his friends, which brings out themes of friendship. So that's a really good example. I kind of don't mind that. So yeah, again, if you want, maybe you would think that the friends are a limitation as well. I'm not sure, but that is an interesting kind of twist on it.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes, like, if one person kind of disregards the societal norms and they decide that they're not going to be constrained by those, they're like, see it as seizing more agency. But for the people around them, that can be threatening. Like, if you're not following the rules anymore, then why should anyone follow the rules?
Yeah, I think, like, I'll just add something, then maybe Brenda and Nicole, you can kind of add some comments. But I think that would take pretty deft writing to have a character with a lot of power and few limitations. It would take deft writing to keep that character interesting. I've written in a magical system, and my one character had a lot of power. Like, she could do a lot with her power. So I kept trying to put limitations on her power because it was almost too much. And then she was always fighting against the limitations, and that I thought provided with some interest. But yeah, to do that well, to have someone who's very powerful and still make that character interesting would take deft writing. Do you have any thoughts on that, Brenda, or anything else we've been talking about?
The only other thought I have on agency really is that it's just another tool in the writer's toolbox to affect the pacing and the plot, create the conflict. That's how I view it.
Yeah. I think from what I'm hearing from all of you, and from what I've sort of taken from this, is that you should use your agency intentionally. Like, you should make sure your character has it, and other characters have it, and then you should be careful in the times that you use it and when you take it away. And then that way you will always have a character that's very interesting and sympathetic. Okay, we're pretty much down to the final 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do is that each of you, why don't you repeat where people can find you? Put it in the chat, perhaps, your website and stuff like that. And then also just a final thoughts on this really, really interesting topic. Why don't we start with Elissa?
So you can find me on Twitter at Elissa McColl, and that was posted in the chat earlier. Yeah, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Nicole?
I'm typing it into the chat as I speak here. There we go. So on Twitter, I'm just at Nicole Luiken, and my website is www.nicoleluiken.com. So it's just the spelling for Luiken is probably the hardest part. I pronounce it Luiken, but there's actually a silent U in there. So
Okay, thanks, Nicole. Oh yeah, let's see that book. That is an epic cover. That's a really cool cover. Oh. You just launched that this year, right?
Yes, November last year.
Oh, okay. Congratulations. How about you, Brenda?
Well, I'm found at www.brendajoyceleahy.com is my website. I'm on Twitter so rarely that not much point in adding that. Mostly interact with people through my website, and Owl's Nest has my book. So if you're looking for historical fiction, that's where it is.
How about your book, Nicole? Where is that?
It should still be in chapters, or if not there, you can certainly order it through them. It's published by Great Plains Publications
Okay, cool.
in Manitoba. So,
All right. And one thing, Elissa, you're also a member of the Creative Academy. Is that true? Like,
Yeah, so it's
you shout out there.
the Creative Academy. It's an organization. I don't know. It's a community for writers, and there's a couple people in the chat that are also part of the Creative
I
Academy.
know. I wanted you to bring it up because it's a really great site, and there's so many knowledgeable authors there who really want to help you out. So yeah, I don't mind giving a shout out to that Creative Academy anytime I could. Okay.
oh, I should give a shout out to Young Alberta Book Society.
Oh
Called
yeah,
YABS.
yeah. You were at their conference, didn't you? Give a speech, or they had an online conference as well, did they not? Or
No, I didn't attend.
oh,
this
okay.
year.
Sorry.
But yeah, I've been a member of YABS for years and years. They often have a festival in the fall, and they organize school readings for authors and illustrators in Alberta.
They're really an organization very devoted to promoting
Yes.
literature among young adults, young adult aged kind of readers. So that's a really great organization. You guys, this was just wonderful. I'm just going to go check we have one more question. Let's see what it is. Oh, no, happy face. That's a really good thing.
Just want to say thanks to Liz for moderating our panel. Thanks for all your support.
And I have to apologize to ask you kind of left-wing questions. So you guys all handled that really well. Thank you so much. If anybody in the audience kind of missed something, or wanted to have some record, or were interested in looking at this again, this session is going to be recorded, and it's going to be uploaded to the When Words Collide YouTube site. And it should be in the next couple of weeks or month, and you can look at it then. So I hope you all enjoy the conference, what's left of it. And I just want to thank you for coming in, seeing us talk about our favorite subject, YA, and character agency in YA. You all take care. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Great.
Thanks, Heather.